Welcome back. In the last video, we got started with mounting our Azure Blob storage with Databricks so that you can read and write your data from Azure Blob storage. In this video, we're going to utilize that storage account which we created, and we're going to read few of the CSV which we have already in the Azure Blob storage. We're going to run some queries, do some very simple transformation to get started with, and at the end of the session we're going to understand how you could write the data, the transformation you have done on top of your data, which in this case is a CSV, and then write back to Azure Blob storage so that it can be consumed by some sort of destination. So let's get into our notebook. Alright, so I've come to my Azure portal. If you go to the storage account and go to Azure Blob Storage, you would see that in the container which we created, code red, I have a sample CSV, a code red travel. This is a CSV which holds information about the travel data which has been generated in past few weeks. People have traveled from some destination to other destination and how many times they have traveled. So we're going to read this data from Azure Blob Storage because that's what we mounted in our previous video. We got started with the mounting, and that's how we did the mounting, and we also understood how you could just do the unmounting. So I've already created a Scala notebook. What we're gonna do first is we are going to read the data. To read the data, we're gonna first create a variable with val name, and we're gonna store our data in some sort of reference. We're gonna reference it. So there's a concept called data frame in Spark. So we're gonna create our data frame. That's gonna be data frame, and that's going to be Spark. Data frame is just consider data frame as a column and a row format, data in a column and row format, just like your CSV, so that Spark can hold data somewhere and then can read from there. So that's why we create data frame, and what we're going to do is we're going to store our CSV information into this data frame. So it's going to be Spark first. That's going to be the entry point. We are going to read the data with the read method. If you see, if you do a RE and do the tab completion, there are two options coming up. First one is read. That's what we're going to use. The second is for the continuous streaming, structured streaming, which we're going to see that how you can, if your data is coming continuously, your data is changing continuously, maybe from some sort of IoT devices, or there are logs being generated and you want to make sure that you don't lose any data. In that scenario, you use the read stream. In this case, we're going to use the read, and we are going to do an option method. Now this option method is interesting, which actually helps us to read, understand how we want to read the data. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that Spark to understand the schema of my data automatically. I don't want to write my schema for this data, so I want Spark to infer the schema automatically. So it's going to be an infer schema, and I want to make it as a true or false. In this case it's going to be true. Once I've done that, I am going to pass it as a CSV, and what I'm going to do is I am going to use the mount which we have created in the last session. I'm just going to run this mount again. So you would see that mount is already created. We're going to go back to our Scala notebook, and we're just going to point our mount, which the mount slash data store. So that's how you read the data, and once you have done that, you could just display the data, and you could just use the display method and put your data frame inside the display, and if you hit run, it should start running the job. And if you see that it has read the CSV successfully, that's how our data kind of looks like. We've got the destination country, origin country, and the count. If you see that on the header it has done something like it is column 0, 1 and 2. If you were to make sure that instead of these by default column, you want to make sure that it reads the header also, Spark to read the header also. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the option command again, and what we are going to do is we're going to put it as a header as true, and we are going to run the Spark query again, and this time it's going to read the header, and instead of throwing up a random column 0, 1, 2, it's going to read and write the header as well. So that's how you read the data. And if you notice, if you now do a display Dataframe.printSchema, there's something called as printSchema. If you run the printSchema command, what it's going to do is Spark going to understand or read your data automatically and infer the schema for you. So if you see, it gives you a schema. The schema consists of 3 primary data sets, which is going to be your string to string type, like the destination country and the original country, and the count, which automatically understand it as an integer. So schema reading is very important because you want to make sure that sometimes you don't want to write your schema manually, and you want Spark to infer or understand the schema automatically. So that's how you write your schema. We're gonna do some more transformation. Let's try to do some transformation. What we're gonna do is we're gonna create a variable, and we are going to, at the moment what it has done is it has selected all the columns it found in the CSV. So what we want to do is we want to select specific columns. So let's probably give it as a specific column of data frame, and what we are going to do is we are going to use the select specific column df, which is going to be our data frame, which we have created right over here. Data frame dot select is the attribute which we're going to use, and we just want to select, let's suppose you want to select just the destination country name. So what you could do is you could just write the destination country name right over here, and you could just write the specific column name, and then just display that specific column, and it's gonna display the specific column. If you just want to pretty it a little, so what you could just use the display method and wrap the variable inside it, and now it's gonna display all the destination country name. If you were to select more columns, you could just add your origin country name as well, and that's gonna select both the column for you. For now we're gonna select all of the column, and so that we can read all of them. What we're gonna do is, let's suppose you want to rename specific column. So what you could just do is you could just create a variable right over here, val rename column, and what we're going to do is we are going to use this variable because that's where our latest data resides. So we are going to use this one, and then we're going to use something called as with column renamed, and you could just mention which column you want to rename. So you want to rename the dest country, so instead of dest country you just want to mention it as the whole name, destination country. And now if you just display the rename column, it is going to give you all the renamed column which you have just made. So if you now closely look at your the header of your destination, it has now changed from dest country name to destination country. So that's how you could just select specific column or rename your column when it is needed be. So now what we're going to do is we have renamed the column. We are going to create a table so that we can run some SQL queries also on top of this. What we're going to do is we are going to use the same variable rename column, and we are going to use the create or create or replaced temp view, and we are going to name it as a code red table, and we are going to run that. So it has run that in the background, and now we could just use the SQL queries to run some of our transformation on top of the table. So what you could do is you could do very simple operation like select star, which if you're coming from a SQL background you would know about it, how to run SQL query. So you could just do it as a percentile sign SQL, and then you could just use select star from the table name. In this case the table name is code red. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to run it, and it's going to select all the information from your table, and this gonna throw you all the information which it has. So let's probably try to run something specific. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use the SQL key name again, and I'm gonna probably select some of the um, run some queries on top of my table. So what I want is I want to select the original country name. I want to select probably the some of the destination country as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the destination country, and I'm also want to do the sum of all the counts. So I'm going to use the sum function and on the count, and then I want to select it from my table, which is code red. And now I want to probably group by maybe my original country name, and I also want to make sure that it also groups by destination, and I want to make sure that it orders by the sum, which is going to be the count. And if I start running this query, this should start giving me some of the result. If you notice that it has summed up all the count, and it is ordered by sum of the count. So if you see that it's in the ascending order, starts with the lowest integer first, and then it is sorted um, according to the integer which we have defined in our SQL queries. Now what we're going to do is we're going to aggregate this attribute, this result, in some variable, and then we're going to use it to send it to our Azure storage. So if you just use the val probably aggregate data, and I'm gonna use the Spark SQL query which I have already run. So what we're gonna do is we are going to put that into 3 braces, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just select all of the query right from here, put it inside over here, and I'm gonna run it. So what it's gonna do is it's gonna put that into an aggregate variable now, which we could use it to write this data onto our Azure Blob Storage. So if you go to the Azure Blob Storage at the moment, inside the code red, it's just a single CSV file which I have uploaded. So what I'm gonna do is now I'm gonna write the data. So I'm gonna use the ag data dot, instead of write I'm going to use the instead of read I'm going to use the write command. If you notice, instead of write you could just use the write stream as well, which is just similar to your read stream, because if you want to read the data continuously you want to also write the data continuously. However, in this case our data is static, so we're just going to use the write, and we're going to use the option as header as true, and we are going to use the format. This is a Databricks specific format. So what we're going to do is Databricks dot spark dot csv, and we are going to save in some mounts, right? This mount's going to be previous mount was data stored to read the data. We want to save it into a result code red, and I want to give it a name as sorted travel dot csv, and I'm going to put this inside a brace. If I run this, this is going to throw out an error because we don't have a mount as result code red. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go back to our previous Azure AZ blob notebook, and we're going to create a mount point as probably the same mount point which we did over here, result code red. Come right over here and run it, and this is gonna give us the mount as result code red, so that we could use to store the data. Alright, the mount has been created. If you just can verify by rerunning it, and it's gonna give you an exception that result code red is already created. We're gonna go back to our Scala notebook and try to write the data by using the aggregate.write option. If you run it, if you notice that it has it didn't give any output, but if you go back to our Azure folder, Azure blob storage, and go to our container, you would see that you have new entries coming up right over here. You have a sorted travel.csv being created. If you go to your Scala notebook, that's the name you gave for your CSV, and if you come back again to your Azure blob storage, it created a folder. If you go to the sorted CSV and then probably try to edit the data and then read it, it hasn't got anything. However, the information is stored right over here. It saves all the information in terms of when it started, whether the query was successful or not, and if you notice that there's something called as part and a random number. Now this random number is for Spark to understand which data it has converted onto, because Spark, whenever it writes the data, it partitions the data, distributes that data into multiple parts, and at the time of reading it, it's gonna accumulate all those parts and give you back the results. If you see the part now, it has got all your result. If you notice right over here, it is sorted basis on the number which you did right over here. It started from the lowest count first, because we have grouped by the sum of all the count, and that's what it has published in the CSV as well. Alright, that's how you write, read, and transform your data using Azure Blob Storage. This was a very basic example how you could read a CSV. I hope this was informative. Thank you.